The Unitarian Universalist theologian Rebecca Parker has always been clear-eyed about the purpose of our religious communion. In essay after essay, book after book, writing alone or with a collaborator, she has told us we gather in hope for the recognition and realization of paradise on earth, rather than after death or after the end of the world. The recognition and realization of paradise on earth rather than after death or after the end of the world. I invite you to hold on to those lines as we proceed with our sermon. We'll return to them, perhaps once, perhaps twice, perhaps more than that. The theme of this month is cycles, and instead of offering you a linear narrative, a sermonic journey in which each phrase passes by like mile markers on a freeway, I'm going to present you with a somewhat more circular text. The recognition and realization of paradise on earth rather than after death or after the end of the world. When I say the word paradise, what do you think of? Or instead of what, should I say where? Maybe when? In many traditions, paradise is conceived of as a garden, a cultivated collection of plants, verdant with leaves and vines, rich with flowers, awash in colors, or covered in soft rain. And so sometimes when I think of paradise, I imagine the great gardens that I've known. There are the Wolfami Gardens in Prague. The city's oldest, they stretch back into the Middle Ages for their origins when they served as the grounds of a bishop's residence. Sometime later, they became the property of a now defunct convent. Then eventually they passed into the Ministry of Finance and eventually the city itself. Or something like that. The gardens are so old that I imagine that their history might as well be a matter of myth. If we were to visit them together, I suspect that you would not care that much about their origin story. Instead, you might be caught, like I have been, in their mystic charm. They're not quite secret gardens, totally surrounded by plastered walls that date from I know not when. You and I can only find them by entering ill-marked doors. And when we do, we're in the midst of a peaceful paradise. Beehives carved from whole logs rest in one corner. Their fronts are shaped like faces, and from their gentle mouths emerge a buzzing, busy, yellow highway of beeves moving, as they do, in circular patterns, from hive to flower to hive and back again. Look over there. Under that aged branch, can you tell how old it is from its whorls and knots? Is that, yes, I think it is, a peacock. The sometime bird of paradise is iridescent, blue as blue can be, brilliant with feathers, and it's just sitting there, resting in the heat, caring not what you or I do. A small river runs through the garden. It's a reminder that rivers have long been associated with paradise. They are symbols of the way in which the divine blessings are imagined to flow over us, like water washing over rocks when we are in the perfect lands. Elder trees are everywhere. For the tree of life and the tree of knowledge are imagined to have existed in the original garden. the tree of life, that symbol of the divine's consecration of the terrestrial world. For trees which breathe in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen are beings which make our human lives possible. The tree of knowledge, that symbol at the heart of the ancient fable, which suggests that to be human is to have knowledge of good and evil. Most cities have tree-filled gardens like these. When I was on sabbatical this summer, I found them in London, Oxford, and Perugia, Italy. Ancient things filled with small spots of forest, neatly laid out with beds of roses and plots of grass gone wild. We do not have to travel so far to find them. After the service, if you wish, you can journey up the street to Herman Park and visit Houston's own paradise plots. There are the Centennial Gardens, complete with fountains, sculpture, and a pyramid mound topped by a winding path. There are the Japanese gardens, carefully laid out with koi-stocked pond. Walk over a stone bridge, gaze into the water, and watch for a flash of gold, silver, or red. You can also just sit in our courtyard, little bit of paradise that it is. The benches along the wall are cool, the water babbles. The trees offer some small shade, and there are plenty of growing vining things. The recognition and realization of paradise on earth, rather than after death or after the end of the world. Rebecca Parker describes paradise as earthly life at its best. That is a statement which invites rich imaginings. If I say the phrase, there might be concrete things that come to your mind. A garden picnic, cool drink, delicious food, and good companionship. Or it might be that the word paradise just causes you to dream of more abstract things. Peace, justice, democracy. The theme for the month is cycles. The majority of Unitarian Universalists have a secular relationship with paradise. In many traditions, especially those most closely connected to Trinitarian Christianity, paradise exists along some sort of linear narrative. Adam and Eve leave the garden. They do not return. Their descendants only find themselves in the idyllic land when time is no more. There is paradise at the beginning. There is paradise to be found at the end, but only human history in between. The story is different for most Unitarian Universalists. Paradise is not something that existed once upon a time. It has not been lost. It will not be found when God ends the world and brings the world to come. No, that is not it. Paradise is something that we can return to again and again, not, in Rebecca Parker's words, as a permanent state of being, but as aspects of life itself. It's like a garden we can revisit. It's not someplace out of time and space. It is that moment, any moment, as she tells us, we find experiences and visions of justice, of the goodness of ordinary life, and of a vibrant peace. The recognition and realization of paradise on earth, rather than after death or after the end of the world. Paradise is not one thing. It is not one place. Visions of justice, vibrant peace, ordinary life. Let me suggest that realizations of paradise are descriptions of relationship. They're not things that come to us unbidden. They are not given to us by some exterior entity, some divine being existing outside of the confines of the terrestrial flow of time or the uneven rhythm of human history. They are things we must work for. We remind ourselves of this each week when we take up our offerings. In this service, the offering is meant to help us remember that the community is something we create together. It is part of our efforts to realize paradise on earth. It is part of our struggle to sustain ourselves and bring a little bit more goodness and beauty into the world. The song that is sung each week right before the offering blessing prompts us to recall these truths. I suspect you remember the simple words. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. To receive, to give, to share, to live. It's a basic sentiment, yet it is also subversive. It runs against one of the great untruths of our society, that we are somehow independent and autonomous creatures, dependent upon no one and unfettered from the natural world. The word should challenge us to remember a different reality. It's clearly spoken of in the seventh principle of our Unitarian Universalist Association. We are called upon to have respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. I depend upon you. You depend upon me. We are all dependent on the health of this green-blue ball of a planet on which we reside and from which we have come. Each of us is, after all, but a temporary expression of it. The matter that composes our being comes from nowhere else but here. Our bodies are made from and propelled by the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the water we drink. Each of these, in turn, is a product of dependent interactions and seemingly endless cycles. Our choir sang of these cycles earlier when they offered us Elizabeth Alexander's tree song. Roots, trunk, branches, leaves. As a tree gives, so it receives. Food from the earth, rain and sun from the sky. Trees can last longer than us. They can grow to great heights and achieve ancient ages. Yet they too are caught in the cycle of giving and receiving. In a healthy forest, each tree has been nourished by the preceding generations. The soil in which the present generation has rooted itself is but the accumulation of life that has come before. The naturalist Peter Wolbenben has reflected on this cycle. Without soil, he writes, there can be no forests. Note, because trees must have somewhere to put down roots. Naked rock does not work, cannot store sufficient quantities of water or food. The soil itself upon which trees are dependent is the product of the accumulated life that has come before. It's been created by bacteria, fungi, and plants, all of which decomposed after death to form humus. This means that in a forest locked in cycles free from human interference, the soil under the trees becomes deeper and richer over time, so that the growing conditions for trees are constantly improving, he observes. In other sermons, I've talked with you about something I call the resurrection of the living. My understanding of it has been inspired by the Christian Gnostic text, the Treatise of the Resurrection. There we find these words in response to the question, what is the resurrection? It is truth standing firm. It is revelation of what is, and the transformation of things, and a transition into freshness. The resurrection of the living is that teaching found in so many of the world's religions that tells us that the purpose of life is to open ourselves to the earthly paradise that surrounds us. It is Buddha's answer to the question, are you a God, with the words, I am awake. It is Jesus' teaching, God is not God of the dead, but of the living. It is the Jewish theologian Martin Buber's claim, all actual life is encounter. It is the Hindu poet Mariabe's enjoinment, get up, stop sleeping. The days of a life are short. It is the Sioux scholar Nick Estes' observation, the moral universe is how one relation relates to others and to the land. It is the recognition and realization of paradise on earth rather than after death or after the end of the world. Part of the resurrection of the living is the simple acknowledgement that in order to be here now, each of us has received enormously from others. And that the only appropriate response, the only way to honestly recognize that this truth about life, the best way to wake up to the reality of being human is to give. We have come into consciousness. We have woken up in this earthly paradise on this tenuous planet that has brought us into being and which sustains our lives. We should be grateful for that. The only way, the best way to express that gratitude is to do our part to realize paradise on earth. Paradise on earth. Now, this is not a call for acquiescence or a claim that all will be well and all will be well and all manner of things will be well, to invoke the great mystic Julian of Norwich. And so let us return to one garden ideal we visited earlier. When I spoke of the Wolfene Gardens in Prague at the start of the sermon, I did not offer you an accurate description of my most recent visit there. For I've been to Prague not once, but several times, and my memory of those gardens is more fixed upon my first visit from 20 years ago than it is upon the gardens they were this summer. Yes, this summer there were peacocks, and yes, there were trees, and yes, hives brought forth a favorite line from William Butler Yeats, in the bee loud glade where peace comes dripping slow. But the spring in the garden's center was running dry and muddy, and the grass was not verdant, it was turning to straw. And so it was with each of the venerable gardens that I visited, Kew Gardens, Hampstead Heath, Gordon Square, all in London, and all far more brown than green. A friend's Italian plot underneath Perugia's medieval wall, almost turning to dust underneath our feet. For all summer while I was there, Europe was in the midst of one of its worst droughts in 500 years. Now here's a place where we could speak about the ongoing nature of the climate catastrophe. But you know about it, and I know about it, and we know what must be done. The recognition and realization of paradise on earth rather than after death or after the end of the world. In another essay, Rebecca Parker has challenged us to reconceive of how we think of the end of the world. It's common to think that the apocalypse, the crisis, the shattering event is something that is coming, something that has not yet arrived. What, however, happens when we stop thinking of the apocalypse as something that is coming and instead acknowledge that it has already happened? In that scenario, Parker wants us to consider how we might regard our religious task differently. In such a scenario, she tells us, the religious enterprise can be imagined as a kind of salvage work, recognizing the resources that sustain and restore life. We are called to wake up to the present state of our earthly paradise. We are called to open ourselves to the truth that it is our task as a human species to salvage what we can. There is nowhere else but here. Let us return to the garden. Let us return to the garden, and let us include also with some words from our poem earlier. The gardens of which I have spoken, be they our lovely courtyard in Herman Park or amid the old European city walls, are human things. They've been nurtured over the generations. The paradise that they offer has been maintained across world wars, pandemics, other droughts, and in some cases, even bombings. They are gifts that we have received from previous generations. It is our challenge to figure out how to gift this earthly paradise to those who will come after. It's our calling to give these gifts across the generations. I tell you now because we are besought by crises. I tell you this now because we already know what must be done. And I tell you this now because we Unitarian Universalists have already been trying to do it, recognizing and revitalizing the paradise that could be and sometimes is. That is why so many of you come here week after week to take your part in this collective work, to inspire each other, and this is why so many of you have been part of our Voting Justice initiative, working together to celebrate and share the common treasury that is our beloved planet. So that together we might say to those who will be here next, let my dreams survive in yours. The recognition and realization of paradise on earth, rather than after death or after the end of the world. That it might be so, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.